All right. Hello, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. Our guests, our participants, our observers, I guess I should say, are beginning to come in. Great to see folks. Let me make sure the chat's working correctly. So when you chat, there's a blue button, click everyone, because sometimes it defaults to just the hosts. And and the panelists, while we do want to see what you have to say, make sure everyone can see. And if you're a bot, I'm just going to delete you. I have nothing against you. You can do whatever you want to do, you bot. Just don't bother us. All right. So, all right. Well, this is the fourth session we've done. This is the Building a New Reality lunch break with Josh Wachtel and Ted Wachtel. And this is the last in our Wherefore Art Thou Restorative Justice series. We did 4 in January, sort of more general theme. And we are going to be posting these all up in time. And we'll be doing more of these eventually. But right now we're just kicking it off. And we do have a really fun guest today, I will tell you, from the UK, from Gloucestershire, and we're going to have a focus on UK, which we really think is a microcosm of what's possible, or the sort of the leading edge maybe in how these restorative ideas are circling around. They started a lot in policing, but they've infected education and social work and community just in general. And so really excited about that. So as I've been doing, I'm going to kick this off with a song. And this is part 1. This is the A side of the single, and I'll play the B side at the end, the Coasters. And here we go. Walking down the street, minding my own affairs, when 2 police persons grabbed me unawares. Said, "Is your name Henry?" I said, "Why, sure." They said, "Then you're the man we've been looking for." Ha! Framed. I was framed. I never do nothing wrong, but I always get blamed. They put me in the lineup and let the bright light shine. There was 10 poor souls like me standing in that line. I knew I was the victim of somebody's evil plan when a stool pigeon walked in and said, "Ha! That's the man." Framed. I was framed. I never do nothing wrong, but I always get the blame. Oh, let me tell you about it. The prosecuting attorney started prosecuting me. Man, that cat gave me the 3rd degree. He said, "Where were you the night of March 29? I said, "I was home in bed." He said, "Judge, this man's lying." Framed. I was framed. I never do nothing wrong, but I always get the blame. I denied the charges of robbing the liquor store. I denied the charges of carrying a 44. I denied the charges of vagrancy too. But when the judge came down, poured whiskey on my head, turned around to the jury and said, "Convict this man, he's drunk." What could I do? Framed. I was framed. I never do nothing wrong, but I always blame. Oh yes. All right, all right. Yeah, there we go. Thank you, Ted. Come in, save
It
me
made me
from
a
my.
little nervous because I saw a falter in your feed for a moment, just quick, but it's okay now.
I found out, yeah, we had technical
Yeah,
difficulties last week, which is our
I agree.
nightmare. Hello, everybody. Ted's here. Um, yeah, it was terrible. Oh, what I found out was I needed to restart the router.
Okay. Anyway,
All
so
right.
I mentioned if people want to put where they're coming in from. I
Yeah.
don't know if everybody knows how these work, but we're building a number of people who get the tapes. We are broadcasting, you might say, broadcasting our little talk
Yeah.
show at noon on a Wednesday, which is not really the ideal
U.S. Eastern Time,
U.S. Eastern time, but
the
frankly,
middle of
the
the
only
middle
time I
day of
can
the week.
really get Josh because he works the other days,
I know.
and so it's
Well, maybe
perfect for us. Okay.
this summer we could experiment a little because I'll have some time off from teaching soon.
Well,
Yeah.
anyway, the goal is to have a regular look at how we can build a new reality. And we talk about it in six facets of social need, from governance to educate, learning to spirit, enterprise, justice, and care. And we're dealing with justice right now, but today in particular, we're not just going to be talking about justice, even though the title is Restorative Justice, because we're really talking about how you can move from an original core interest in restorative justice to the notion of restorative practices in a variety of fields, learning, social work, schools. And back, I was talking earlier with our guest, and, I remember wait a minute, more than 20 years ago. Yeah, decades ago, O'Connell and I and others were working with the Thames Valley Police. Sir Charles Pollard was the chief constable at the time, and he instigated a restorative justice consultancy. People like Les Davy, who later ran IIRP's offices in Europe, was one of the very first trainers, and so that era, has left a lot of effect. It had an impact. You just didn't know at the time, but it's spread out into other areas of UK jurisdictions. And that's, I think, really promising because it allows us to begin to think about the whole notion of restorative community, which I
Yeah.
don't know, gosh, if you
Well,
helped with that, develop that book with Kara Bolton
we
and
do have a book people should know called Restorative Community. The IIRP .edu bookstore sells it. International Institute for Restorative Practices Graduate School sells it in their bookstore. It's the
well,
main
and it's
editor and
also sold on
author.
Amazon if you are into Kindle or something. It's also available
Oh
in
yeah,
that.
but the author was Kara Bolton, who Banner hired to be a communications person for us for a number of years. And she got to travel and see Detroit. She got to go to uh, Belgium and see Netherlands too. Or
Netherlands, the UK.
yeah.
She also is a former journalist, which
Right.
was one of my primary interests because she was very skeptical when I first told her about restorative practices. And I said, perfect.
Yeah.
If I can say you came here not knowing anything about it and have, had a chance. So she had some observations about how places we were sending her to where there was multiple use of restorative coming from different. She had some notions as to, I thought it was pretty interesting. She had 5 points.
Yeah. Pull them up because yeah. So the book's a lot of fun. It covers a lot of areas, and of course, there's more that it could. But um, and
yeah,
then she pulled this observation together, which you pulled out for your
yeah,
expanding restorative
right.
paper. So if folks might want to look at that too.
On
But
our
but
on my
the
website, there's a paper called
but I
Restorative
thought I
Justice.
thought it was a really astute observation about this possibility that a synergy will happen when
Right.
restorative starts coming in. And what was nice is she gave five possible routes that it could go.
Well, there are
And
five. She says that restorative communities are likely to have at least two or more of the following characteristics. So, uh,
yeah,
decentralized power and participatory decision making are sewn into the fabric of their organizational or community culture. It's how they do things. That is by engaging people and not relying on a solely leadership driven model. Restorative practices are also adopted at least half of the they've adopted at least half of the six facets, that we talk about: learning, governance, care, justice, enterprise, and spirit. So there's some multiple facets of restorative in that community. Implementing restorative practices comes from the community. It's not a government program subject to annual budgets and political whim. Now, I'm not sure that's entirely true. And in fact, where it is true, where it is solely budgets and political whim, you don't know what's going to happen. But if the community catches on, and I think that's one of the things we can talk about today, how the UK transitioned from a police program to a larger one, it's true that the support comes from the community. And restorative practices are cross-pollinated throughout the community. For example, police departments are using restorative practices to engage the community, even in schools and neighborhoods where restorative practices are already embedded. And lastly, she says there are regular and frequent opportunities to learn about restorative practices through workshops and classes. There's a lot of training activity in communities that are doing restorative practice. So
yeah.
that was a kind of useful framework.
Yeah. And as we were doing some events, going back 3, 4 years or more, maybe, we all of a sudden we're getting multiple folks from Gloucestershire, UK, attending and resonating with this idea. And well, they're inviting you to speak in June, correct? They're
Yeah,
doing.
well, I don't,
We don't
yeah,
even know everything about it, but that's coming up.
I heard, yeah, I heard.
Yeah, and the other thing is, and some of those folks I see on the in the participant list today, and hopefully you guys will, feel free to chat in with questions. We're going to get the conversation started just in a second with our guest, who is from Gloucestershire. Did you want to say
Yeah, and
something
and
else?
if I can well, just to say that Ben Fisk and Ingerbrit Lowater were on one of our webinars. I think
Yeah,
it's almost 2 years ago, or plus more than a year. And again, sort of getting around this issue of restorative community, and that's why Jonathan Hobson's stuff is so timely for us. Not only were we on a string of several of these lunch breaks on restorative justice and Wherefore Art Thou, but he shows up with an new edited book that Ben Fisk and others have contributed to. But basically, he's talking about whole system change, and I'll obviously let him tell you about it, but it's very much matches this whole idea of restorative community is that as you provide restorative in social welfare, social work, and prison settings, and policing and so forth, you start to get a synergy. And enough for me.
all right. Well, no, that's perfect introduction. So, Jonathan, please join us. There we go. All right, Jon Hobson is a professor. It's the University of Gloucestershire. Is that? Yeah,
That's
simple
right.
as
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Represent.
And tell us, we're going to talk about the book and all the ideas, but, just give us an idea how you got involved, when you got involved, where you got involved in restorative justice, and some of the pathways you've taken to get here.
Yeah. Thanks. And thanks for such a lovely introduction, both in song and also in conversation around, restorative justice across the UK and its different parts. So I've been working in the field of restorative justice, restorative practice broadly, probably for the past, 10 or 15 years. I started off looking at the power, value, and how we can understand democracy as a process. That's what my thesis was years ago now. Really, and that was sort of primarily focused on how people can be in charge of their, the decisions that are made about their lives. So in that sense, when I sort of started hearing about restorative justice and restorative practice, it wasn't a big jump for me. That, oh, well, here's something that actually puts people back in charge of some of those, some of those difficult points of their lives where there might have been conflict or harm. So it really resonated with me as a process. And, it's one of those things that you hear a bit about, and you think, oh, I'm going to look into this a bit more. And we had a couple of wonderful colleagues that at the university at the time that were teaching a bit and doing a bit about it. And in particular, we're working in Northern Ireland. And so I went over to Northern Ireland, on several work trips to see what was going on there. In particular, how post-conflict in Northern Ireland restorative justice, restorative practice was being used to heal some of the communities that had been torn apart by violence. Some of those people that had been initially been picking up the guns that were picking up, these processes of not just managing the immediate outfall of that conflict, but also managing the managing the communities that had been torn apart. So that stuff that was really focused on justice and overcoming the justice of the harm that had been specifically been done, but also stuff that was about, thinking more broadly about communities, about young people, about the opportunities they had and the ways that they were interacting with each other and, and with other communities there in particular. And it just struck me as something that was a really powerful way to put people back in charge of events that they probably weren't always in charge of, and for people to chart their own destiny. So I guess ever since then, it's been the primary focus of my work. And I teach, courses on restorative justice, and I supervise PhDs, and I write research reports and academic papers. I've been to many countries around the world looking at how restorative justice is implemented, how it works. North America, Canada, Sierra Leone in post-conflict circumstances. They're in different to Northern Ireland in many ways, but similar in some ways in the terms of communities that have been, rent apart by violence.
Yeah.
And how that violence is trying to be overcome. And that sort of led me to this really broad position in restorative justice and restorative practice of, well, it's not just embedded in direct harm, where of course we know it does phenomenal benefit to those that have been involved in in those incidents of harm, but it's also embedded in a lot of other different processes and systems, and social structures, the different ways that we can build on those philosophies of communication and understanding
Could you just say the title of the book? Because that, as a lead, I felt that really got my attention.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a good segue as well. Thank you. Yeah. So I guess so the book's called.
Well, and I was gonna. Yeah, go ahead. Well, let me just say, because I want you just to keep going. That my next question was, give us the picture of the UK. Tee it up.
I can use the book as a motion into that, no problem. So the book's called Integrating Restorative Justice, a Whole System Approach, and the focus of it is looking at, I guess, this one context. And although the UK is, of course, 3 or 4 different contexts with Northern Ireland and with Scotland and England and Wales, but this broad context, I guess, where we can see the ways in which restorative justice and restorative practice have become increasingly present in a whole range of different processes. So it's out in October. We're just going through the final bits of editing now, and with all the publishers, which is always fun. But there's 24 chapters from a whole range of different practitioners and academics and policymakers. We've tried to really get this range of people that know their sector, that know what's happening in their particular area, and can give us some really vivid, beautiful examples. There's at least one other author on this call. I won't say who it is. You can guess it. But it covers really sort of 4 or 5 broad areas. So criminal justice, education, the sort of state in its broadest, what we might call the third sector as well, so charities and other parts of state service and state provision, and then communities and cultural organizations. And then I sort of top and tail it with try and put a bit of a framework on there to help us understand some of those cross-cutting themes around, well, how can we think about this integration? What are the ways in which it's happening? What are the challenges that, in each of those different types of integrating restorative justice that we might come across? And so what the book's trying to do is capture this whole system, this whole system, restorative justice in the UK. And, in some areas, restorative justice is doing fantastically. It's growing and there's more going on. There's people learning. And in other areas, it's challenged because of things like funding, and perhaps political will and just sometimes inertia, So this sort of mixed picture of, well, this is brilliant, this is great, but this is struggling a bit here. So I guess if we think about the UK, what's going on then in the UK, as with many countries, one of the first areas that we really see restorative justice kicking off was in criminal justice, partly because there's obviously a lot of opportunities for managing some of those incidents of direct harm, but also because in a practical sense, criminal justice systems often have the money to invest in what they see as either diversionary or supportive or other mechanisms to bring people together. And also because criminal justice systems traditionally, as we all know, don't always work very well. So they're ripe for a whole range of people that have worked within or near to those systems saying this can be done better. This isn't effective, criminalizing people and chucking people in prison and, removing victims or harmed and harmers, away from each other. This is not working. So they're a great source, they're a great site of sort of instigation. And in the UK, certainly from the beginning of the 20th century, late on in the 1900s, which sounds like a whole nother era, doesn't it? And the 20th century, we had a real growth in the UK in RJ and policing. And that sort of ended up in the government putting what we call ring-fenced funding or allocated funding in all the different areas towards the development and use of restorative justice. So there was a time when all the police services, all the areas were doing a lot of restorative justice. Politics change. Ted, you said you pointed this out yourself at the beginning. Politics change, funding changes because of this. And restorative justice in the policing context in the UK probably died down a bit. Still going on. There's still lots of great work going on. But what we saw around about the same time was this growth of restorative justice and particularly restorative practices in other areas. Education being a great example of that. And we've got a whole section of chapters where we're looking at the ways in which schools and local education, regional authorities, in a whole range of different ways have implemented restorative practices, some for direct issues of bullying, or some for helping teachers manage their classes, some for students and how they get on with each other on an everyday basis, and that's been a really fruitful, successful sort of area right across the UK. Gloucestershire, where I'm based, is wonderful. There's a local authority team that goes out and trains head teachers in order to support them in developing restorative practices in their school. I mean, one of the things that they found that they used to do quite a lot of was go out and train lots of teachers and say, right, you're trained, off you go and do restorative practice. Brilliant, which is wonderful. But what they found was that those teachers would go out enthused, filled with the joys of something that's better, but get back to their schools that were still built in a punitive manner, that were still struggling, with all the things those schools were struggling with. And actually, they were fighting against really strong headwinds to try and make a difference. So instead, they moved to a model of supporting and training head teachers to develop their schools as a whole. So it's perhaps a smaller process. You're not training quite so many people, but what you are doing is you're training people that can make systemic differences to those schools, that can build things in that is bigger than the one or two people that you might train and put into that school, that's going to endure beyond the the life of the person in that institution. And again, certainly one of the things that we found right across all the chapters in the book is that where you're looking to build restorative justice into systems, into services, into communities, you've got to be aware of the danger of that coming from just one or two people in that service. Those sort of, really,
Right.
evangelical leaders that
Sure.
are, that are
They can be
wonderful.
really effective. I mean, they can really, and they make great stories and media too. But once they leave, the whole
Exactly.
thing reverts if the
You
next
probably need
person
them. You probably need them to kick something off.
to model what it is, what it can
Exactly.
be. Yeah.
Exactly, but then the challenge then is to step beyond that and build something in that's going to endure, in systems and practices, in the way, in the culture, the overarching culture, the way that
Right.
things are done. So that's certainly some of the stuff in education, but then we've also seen in the UK some really wonderful stuff in social work. The use of family group conferencing, has become more and more popular. In particular for social services teams that are working with families that may otherwise have their children removed to local authority care. Well, actually co-producing care plans with those families. Not doing to, but doing with. Sort of supporting them collectively to make plans along with the professionals that can support them, that are going to help them improve the family life of everybody involved. And they've been extremely beneficial. There's just been I can't remember the name of the authors, but there's just been a huge study completed in the UK of family group conferencing.
Awesome. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
and,
good.
and just very clear on the impact it has in terms of keeping more children with their families, because those families are more able to look after them properly. So it's a really wonderful,
And of course, that saves a ton of money and all the other things along with it.
yeah, money and
Satisfaction and
time,
trust in government. And
yeah. But also,
Just out of curiosity, John. Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah. No,
Just
no,
out
go,
of
go.
curiosity, we had a woman named uh, Vidia Negria on a couple of weeks ago, and she talked about the use of FGC in
Yeah.
prisons, which she had the opportunity to do. Has any of that approach to restorative, or is it largely in the sector you were describing?
So there is conferencing that goes on in prisons to some extent. I'm just engaged in a project, so evaluating a project. So I do a lot of evaluation of
Right,
restorative projects, try and provide the evidence that this works.
right.
Because those that count the beans, to fund these kind of services need to know that. I mean, we know
That's
it,
right.
works, but you have to provide the evidence, right? So I'm just
Yeah,
engaged in a very interesting project in a prison at the moment. It's working with a group of prisoners called IPP prisoners in the UK. They're prisoners that have effectively no end to their sentence. It's a short, they're like lifers, but in a more extreme context. And so this group of prisoners, as you can imagine, have just many of them feel like they have absolutely no hope. They are, they've often come from very difficult personal circumstances. Many have done some very horrendous, challenging things. Some of them, for minor but repeat offences, which adds another layer of challenge. But they find themselves in very, very challenging circumstances. And there's a project that we're just finishing off an evaluation for that's working with them. It's called Restoring Me, Restoring Myself, Restoring My Community. So it's got these different tiers, and what it's trying to do is use restorative practices within the prison, including circles. So probably not FGC
right,
at the
right.
moment, but
Yeah,
using circles to train the men up that are in prison, to train the prison staff up, so that they can use restorative practices in their everyday life. So where we come to conflict between inmates, where we come to conflict prisoners to prison
excellent.
guards, and this is having a phenomenal effect on them. And as a consequence, a lot of them are working on reconnecting with their families, because they feel, they can begin to understand and deal with some of the harm that they've caused, but also the harm that's been caused to them, and the ongoing harm of these very challenging, sometimes very long sentences that they're undergoing, and they're managing their own behavior better. So there's some movement certainly towards, how in that, how those relationships with families of people that are in prison can be rebuilt.
Yeah, that's great. I really appreciate the diversity of. I haven't finished reading the whole book. I've jumped around it.
You have an advanced copy. There you go.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and but I haven't. There was a lot there, and I just wondered if there's some other areas that are diverse that you might want to speak to.
So this one of the ones that I found really absolutely fascinating. Well, I mean, they're all fascinating, of course, but one of the ones that I hadn't read a lot about before that was fascinating to me was the use of restorative practices in what we call forensic mental health settings. And forensic mental health settings are for those people that have committed often very serious crimes, but have been deemed to, that their mental health is so bad that they can't be held in a
Right.
standard prison estate, that they need to be in a secure mental health unit. And there's some wonderful work going on in probably the most secure mental health unit in the UK, which is Broadmoor Prison, by a fantastic team of forensic psychologists that are using, similar to the prison example, that are using restorative practices within their wing of the institution to support those men. In that case, again, they are all mostly men, actually, to support them in managing themselves and their behavior with the other people that are imprisoned in this unit. They're not using them at the moment for those relational events with the people that they've harmed as part of their crime,
Right.
because those are very serious, and many of those people are probably, they struggle often
Right.
in terms of empathy, but they're using it as an everyday conflict management process and as a regulatory process, and the impact they found on their behavior, and for staff as well, how this changes the way that the staff of the institution regard and interact with those people that are imprisoned, because they have a much better contextual understanding of the person and why they're there, which improves the culture of the wing, and it improves the staff retention in the wing, it improves the behavior in the wing. So really, really significant impact in what is got to be one of the most difficult places to implement
Absolutely.
these kind of practices. There's another really good example, when we look at some of the broader cultural expressions of restorative practice, and these are often, as opposed to some of the other examples I've given, particularly in policing, and in youth justice, for example, that are very top down, and education to some extent, they're very top down processes. The community ones are bottom up. They're often responses by communities to community need, and these are the two sometimes diametrically opposed types of restorative justice and practice. We get into some real problems between people that espouse each one of these top down or bottom up approaches. But
Is there an example you can comfortably give that's.
so of the conflict, or of bottom up, or both?
Both,
Bottom up,
really?
I think. Oh, well, yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of bottom up restorative practices, there's a wonderful example of restorative storytelling. It's the penultimate chapter in the whole book. Before I sort of tie it up a little bit at the end with a sort of concluding chapter, and it's from a wonderful restorative storyteller that I know. She's a traditional storyteller, and she came to restorative justice as a sort of mechanism that she felt had tapped into some of those same narrative cultures that she was brought up with as a traditional storyteller. And so she goes around and works with different restorative agencies or in different organizations, and tells stories that have at their heart this idea of understanding, reconciliation, harm and overcoming harm, but in this very sort of journeyed way, that we understand the harm, we understand the people, we understand the mechanisms of the harm, we understand what hurt it did to people, and we understand how people may not overcome this. And she does this as a way to, to help people within the organizations, or anyone that really hears those stories, help them in themselves to follow those journeys in their own lives a little bit, to think about this process, to understand the other, to build this narrative within self almost. It's a beautiful chapter, and it's got some sort of vignettes in there as well of the stories that she uses. So you got that one to come, perhaps, Ted. If you're partway through the book, it's lovely. It's a really lovely story.
Yeah. Yeah.
That sounds great. Though, I wanted to ask, just in terms, you said you started with democracy. The other, I think you might be aware, we've done a lot on citizens' assemblies, and Ted's saying, we need to expand the restorative continuum to have all these kind of processes. And the UK does have a movement, some interesting. Sortition Foundation is based there, and are you seeing that in any of the communities, or are people connecting that to restorative? I mean, I'm sure there are some of these things happening, but whether
you obviously were thinking it in your head that way, going from democracy to this stuff. So
yeah, so there's a chapter as well on the in the sort of bottom up section there on restorative cities. Restorative communities, which again is really, really interesting, and that's it's modelled on Bristol, which is a city in the southwest of the UK. That has as a bit of context, was the city that was perhaps one of the cities that was the heart of the slave trade in the UK. It's made a lot of its money, from that awful trade, but has subsequently become, certainly in more recent years, a very, very liberal city. Tried to be very aware of its past, rejected those parts of its history, but tried to memorialize them as something that's been wrong, and tried to build itself in a different context. And so there was a really strong movement in Bristol to become a restorative city, and there are a few other cities in the UK that have tried to do this, and they did this as sort of by building. The intention was to build this sort of web of organizations tied together by broad restorative principles. Some of those very embedded, some restorative justice service providers, delivery providers, others that were perhaps, very relational organizations that were, undertaking relational practice, maybe not call it restorative, but certainly very relational, and certainly very open to the philosophy. And they had some great success for a few years in finding ways that those different organizations could support each other with learning, with resources, with opportunities to think and grow and develop. Again, that one of your principles, isn't it, from the book you were talking about earlier, that those opportunities to learn and grow. And it was very successful for some time. However, they ran into a couple of issues. One was, the more that they engaged with some of the state-funded agencies that have a very fixed way of doing things, the more they came up to these barriers of, well, no, we have to, we like this, we can do some of it, but we have to do these things in this way because this is the nature of the organization. Again, that's the top down and the bottom up coming into conflict with each other. The other one was, the realities of funded life in the 21st century is that, for a long time, services have been under pressure. Money's been cut, certainly in the UK. The provision of services has become more and more restricted to what is often regarded as essential business,
right?
And those things that are nice to have, and restorative practice was getting dropped into the nice to have box. They're the things that get cut. Because they're not essential, much to the upset often of the organisations that are cutting them.
Right.
This isn't done. But it's not done. In a sort of gleeful way, but it's done because those services find themselves under such great pressure. And one of my jobs, certainly with this book, and certainly with the other work that I've done, is fundamentally about providing that evidence, empirical evidence, as an academic, empirical evidence that says, this does work. Josh mentioned earlier, it saves money. It has better
Well,
outcomes.
one of the interesting stories of exactly that question was over in the Netherlands, where Rob van Page, organized family group conferencing under the Eichenkrankt organization. There are others also that are doing that service, but they went through that struggle with the system, and they eventually were able to provide very good evidence that wherever there was a family group conference, they saved a bundle of money. People took care of things that were otherwise put on, services and so on. And they actually got a law that requires that people, same as New Zealand, who kicked the whole thing off, that they have to give people a chance to solve their own problem. And I know Family Rights Group in the UK has been very active in advocating for that. And I think it's become largely true in some jurisdictions. I think it's always a tension of
Yeah,
sustaining the service and so on.
yeah. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I think, I mean, one of the things I do as well in the UK is I'm part of what's called an all-party parliamentary group on restorative justice. So this is a group of politicians from across the political spectrum. Imagine such a wonderful thing coming together, and having a conversation about something they
It's a good
believe in.
theme. It's a good theme to
It's a
come around.
yeah. And there's been a big push in that group to try and embed the use of restorative justice more effectively in law. So at the moment, for adults in England and Wales, anyway, the law is that you have, as a victim of a crime, you have the right to hear about restorative justice. That's it. No right to pursue it. No right to access, but you have the right to. You should be told about it. In
Right.
practice, the statistics show probably only about 6 or 7% of people do remember that. The law is slightly, it's slightly different in Scotland and Northern Ireland. In adult justice, in youth justice in the United Kingdom, there's much better embedded opportunity. So restorative justice is one of the key performance indicators for our youth offending team. So each area will have a youth offending team where young people that are sent to them, they'll support them if they've committed a crime or been a victim of a crime to some extent. And one of their key performance indicators is that they have to have provided a certain amount of restorative justice and practice opportunities for those young people. So it's much better embedded for young people than it is for adults.
Yeah.
But one of the key reports that we produced for the APPG talked about the UK, certainly England and Wales, as what we'd call a postcode lottery or zip code lottery in the US context. That depending on where you are, depending on what region you live in, the access, the opportunity for the volume of restorative services that are available vary massively. Right. Some areas spend millions of pounds in it, have great services that are integrated in a whole range of different areas. Other parts of the country have almost nothing. Okay. So it becomes really problematic because this lack of joined up legislation means that you're really just in the hands of whatever the local politicians particularly think is important in their
political whims of the time.
The whims of the time. Yeah.
Well, no, this is really helpful. I mean, I've been out of the loop to the extent that I go to occasional conferences and so forth. But and your book is really timely, obviously, for our series. Wherefore art thou? I think is you've given a really helpful summary in addition to the individuals. And I'm thinking, Josh.
Well, I wanted to say, folks out in the audience have any questions? This is your time.
That's what I was
because
thinking.
we're probably winding down here. But it does. I don't know. Do you want to talk a little bit? I put a link in about the call we did, and you were on a call that was organized just more privately, but there were like 15 or 20 of you folks from Gloucestershire. So I maybe just what's it like living in Gloucestershire? I mean, you do have several areas of work, and you got things going at the university. You've been training PhDs. Some of them, they go off, right? But more coming, and you're researching your own work as well as looking outward to these other projects. I'm just curious, what's the vibe? Is it a restorative community in process? What's the feeling?
I think it's a good question. I think we there are some things we're doing really well in Gloucestershire, and I think one of the strengths is that we've got a number of different areas in which restorative justice and practices are existent. So certainly the policing on the policing side of things, we've historically had a really good, well embedded restorative justice team. It's one of the areas that where there's been belief in it. It's been funded. It's been set up well. There's a hub and spoke model they use with which has actually been used all over the world now. And people often cite Gloucestershire as one of the key
Right.
provenances of that, where you have a core group in a hub of organizations, and then all of those different organizations that might be useful or might want to embed it as sort of around that sort of hub and spoke. So the way it works really, really well. The model in Scotland was built from this, and in Ireland as well. There's a lot of work going on here in a hub and spoke approach. So that's been really, really effective. In education, the local authority have a team dedicated to supporting schools and training head teachers, and working within the local authority to support the diffusion of ideas of restorative practice. And in the university we teach it. I used to run a national course for people that looking to improve skill levels and things like that, and theorize some of the skills they have and achieve registered practitioner status. So it's been fantastic. What we are struggling with, as everyone is struggling with, is the ongoing downtick of funding, in everything. And it's at the moment, I think what we're trying to do is maintain all the great stuff we've done and what we've got in what's, I don't want to say a hostile environment, but certainly a really challenging environment. And we're trying really hard to keep it going until the point that we know will come again, when perhaps the funding's a bit easier and there's more people, we can afford more people
I
involved.
hate to be cynical, but you have to compete
You
with the
do.
purchase of war weapons. It's
Yeah.
become a big consumer
Yeah.
of everybody's budget, and it's part of the underlying
Yeah.
pressure throughout the world trying to do these things in a world that's
Yeah.
burning things up.
There is a question. In all your studies, do you have any tips for helping jurisdictions accept RJ practices for making systemic changes? What have you seen any interesting ideas around that?
Whoa, what a good question. Um, whenever it's a really good question, and people, I get asked this in different ways in different times,
That's
right?
right.
Because
We always hear it. We always hear it.
it's a tough one. My response is always, you've got to provide them with the evidence they need, not the evidence you like.
Mm,
So local authorities need evidence of money savings. They need evidence of improvements in
Right.
teacher retention, or improvements in satisfaction, or crime clear ups, or whatever it could be. The person that you're speaking to, the team you're speaking to, that authority will have their own pressures that they are under, and you need to know what they are so you can provide them with the evidence that's there. I think historically, restorative justice and restorative practice have been really, really good at providing human level evidence of impact, because it's there in abundance. It's
Right.
absolutely there in abundance. It's wonderful, but we've not always been as good as we might have been in providing some of the funding, the empirical evidence that this is the money that this is going to save. That there've been some great studies on that, but they're fewer and further between than we need, perhaps.
Yeah.
um I mean, the good example I give for this is if you're thinking about selling restorative justice to a school, right? You got to provide evidence to everybody that's involved in that system. For the kids in that school, you need to say, this is going to make your interactions with your classmates better. For the teachers, you've got to say, this is going to make managing your class easier. For the school, you need to say, this is going to reduce teacher sickness. This is going to improve your results. And for the local authority, you need to say, this is probably going to make your school cheaper to run and improve your overall your overall, statistics for the school provision in your district.
Right.
And it's every single one of those things requires a certain type of evidence, and you've got to give the right one to the right person.
Right.
Well, that's an interesting observation. Yeah.
All right.
All right. Well, this has been great, Jon. I'm so glad we got you on and refresh our relationship here. And looking forward to the book coming out. And we will let everybody know about that. We're going to post the recording and on and on. And maybe my dad will see you at that presentation in Gloucestershire in June. All right.
So I'd like to thank you also. I just really appreciate it. It was very timely. And I also want to just take a moment now just to reach out to the audience that are here, but people who will be watching the tape as well on their own time, that we're coming to the end of a series of 4. In fact, I was thinking of a baseball metaphor, Jon. You were kind of a good cleanup hitter, they fourth batter in a baseball game. And ideally, they hit a home run and bring the other players in too.
Grand slam, I'd say. Yeah.
A grand slam. So a little baseball jargon, but I think that we're now turning our attention to true representation, and those of you who are
back to the democracy stuff.
Yeah, and we have a new film that we're going to be able to show the preview version to people who are on our website, and then we're going to be offering it, in fact, to restorative justice organizations who've agreed to help me publicize it, and so on and so forth. And we're also going to do a series of these with people related to true representation. So guests who are doing it in various ways, creating citizens' assemblies, who are starting organizations. It's really exciting how much is happening. And what I'm asking of people is, one, could you tell people to sign up at our website? Could you help me recruit? When posts come out in various social media, could you help share them as you see fit? And finally, if you have the wherewithal to help with a donation, this is the first time that we're really going to begin to systematically try to do things that are going to cost us more money to do than what we've been spending to date. So that's at our website, Banner Foundation /donation. Thanks, and see you again soon, I hope.
All right. You guys can, turn off if you like, and I'll close out with, as I said, the second part of this song by the Coasters. Well, it's 2 songs, really, by the great writing team of Lieber and Stoller. And I should say that if restorative justice had been used in this prison, this would not have happened. July 12th, 2025, I was serving time for armed robbery. 4 o'clock in the morning, I was sleeping in my cell, and I heard a whistle blow, and I heard somebody yell, there's a riot going on. Ooh, there's a riot going on. Well, there's a riot going on down in cell block number 9. Trouble started up in cell block number 4, spread like wildfire across the prison floor. I said, guys, get ready to run. Here comes the warden with a Tommy gun, and there's a riot going on. Where there's a riot going on. Where there's a riot going on. Up in cell block number 9. The warden said, come out with your hands in the air. You don't quit this riot, you're all gonna get the chair. Scarface Jones said, it's too late to quit. Pass the dynamite. The fuse is lit, 'cause there's a riot going on. Well, there's a riot going on. Well, there's a riot going on now up in cell block number 9. In the 47th hour, they called the helicopters in. We're all back in our cells, but every now and then there's a riot going on. Ooh, riot going on. Well, there's a riot going on up in cell block number 9. All right, folks. Thanks again, and we'll be sending out information about all these things. See you soon.